and suddenly you got to know it in another language. I know some of that stuff will be the same word, but like jumbled around. But even so, it's just mad.
Different
Not all
languages,
words, just
everybody.
jumbled around, Johnny. Like,
They're all just words jumbled around.
welcome to this episode 11 of No Idea Yet. Are you too afraid to ask or too lazy to Google? Come to the right place. So this week we are with Freddie.
Hello.
And Johnny.
Hello there.
And we are going to be talking about, drumroll, you may have seen this one coming, languages and linguistics.
Oh, no way. It's not Bitcoin.
We're talking about Bitcoin again. Ad nauseam. No, yeah, we're talking about languages and linguistics, and yeah, our thoughts on this, and sort of the study of it within the UK, and compare that to Europe,
Or lack thereof.
Exactly, and sort of the sort of development of language from being a baby and as you get older and everything. So yeah, we're going to touch on some of those areas.
So if this was Johnny's episode, the first question is going to be, so what is a language? Give a definition.
You know, 100%.
It's about languages, and not limiting to human languages, of course. We're going to go for everything. But yeah, no. So so I mean, to get the ball rolling, I know Freddie, you have some fairly strong, perhaps, views on this, on the UK kind of attitude towards language learning and kind of UK's take on it. So let's go straight in with that one, shall we? Over to you, Freddie.
Man, it's so annoying. I mean, like, the biggest problem, understandably, I guess, is like, but what language do we choose to learn in school? Because everyone just speaks English, which is like a view that I think far too many people hold. But
for sure.
I don't know. I just, having now started learning languages, I find it a lot more interesting and realize how important it is to be able to speak to people in their own tongues, even just a bit, just to show some respect in their countries, let alone a bunch of other benefits that it brings. And yeah, so I'm sad about the severe lack of ability in England, especially, and about its language learning. But also, I just find language learning really, really interesting now that I've started talking to people in other languages. It's so cool. But it's very hard to instill that in kids if they're not exposed to other languages, which other people in Europe are, especially if their TVs and stuff are subbed and not dubbed. That is a big problem that I don't know if we're going to talk about. So yeah, I think they should have some more push in England for linguistics, but not in the way that's like, right, you must learn the French grammar. I just think it would be cool to have it where maybe there's smaller classes. For different languages, you can choose which one you want to do it, and you just play games in it, and you learn to communicate in a different way. And I think that would be a better way to instill or inspire the kids.
Yes, but how will you put a number to it, and then how good will the school therefore be after it? Oh, you've got to have tests about grammar.
Yeah, I think we're missing out there. But I think it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So other kids growing up in Europe's perspective, they obviously kind of quite a young age, they have to learn English. There's no choice. It's you learn English from the age of 5 or 6 maybe. And in the UK, it's sort of you get to 14, 15, and they're like, oh, do you want to learn French? Like, and you can be like, nah, I'm okay. You know what? Then obviously you go abroad in Europe, and you sort of second class citizen, as it were, almost with we just sat there with your English. It's probably not even as good as the sort of native Norwegians. So I don't know, but yeah, Johnny, what's your thought?
Because isn't it meant to be like the age of the best age, well, other than from birth, of somewhere effectively just before starting high school is the best time to learn a language for kids to be able to, you've still got enough of that malleability in your, like, for learning languages. And so I think I learned from when I was 7 French, but again, I think it's, say in other countries, there's really like that thought of, this is a useful thing to learn, whereas I feel in schools it's just not put across as a useful thing.
What age are you defining that? So right before high school, just to put a number on it.
No, this is so like high school age is about 11 to 12.
Yeah.
I think I started learning in primary school when I was about 7, so I think that was one of the right age to start learning, at least if you are going to start just before high school effectively. But a lot of schools, you don't do it until high school, and I think it's not, you don't have, because like Spanish, for instance, you've got all of South America and as well as Mexico as well, and then you've got Spain, and like there's what's the second most spoken language, and that'd be such a, I think going to America and then chatting with family who's born in Colombia of how cool it is to also be able to speak a language, because we went to like a classic authentic Mexican kind of I want to say takeaway, something like that, for authentic Mexican food, and he was just speaking Spanish. I was like, I'm so the white guy here. I have no idea. But it was a thing of like, you're just shutting yourself off from that. And I think for a lot of people, until you actually start traveling, you never need to learn another language. Whereas a lot of countries, they have it as effectively a second language, English, because it's easier, especially if you work with tourism. Whereas the same family member of Colombia, he got married in England. And when he came over here, his mum, she's Colombian, only speaks Spanish, doesn't speak any English. And as soon as you get off that plane to England, you're just dropped. Like when we go on holiday, you go to an airport, everyone is bilingual there. Hotels are bilingual. You come to England, no one speaks your language. He's like, oh, do you not know English? Well, oh, no, only we go on holiday. It should be other people coming to our country.
Yeah, it's
it's
the arrogance of the English in a big way, right? So it's pretty
100%.
terrible. Yeah,
And it's only like reinforced by science, English being the language of science, for instance, or like was it like the most spoken second language English, something like that?
Yeah, I feel like that's one thing I do feel quite strongly about, and I make a point to bring up if someone's sort of like quite disparaging or quite like impatient with someone who's using their second language, especially in a workplace, then I'll be quite quick to say, like, all right, well, every word they know in English is a word that you don't know in their first language that they're not speaking. So yeah, I think that is that's where it gets a bit gets a bit.
They're working
in their
second language, which is just mad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like when you start actually, I don't know, because most of our school life, right? If you are learning a language at school, it's just you're learning how to say I go here or I eat this or what's the past participle for this,
My
and they
name.
try sometimes, huh?
Like my name
Yeah.
is. When do you just say I am? You never say my name is. When has anyone ever said in conversation my name is? You say
Or I'm
I
called.
am. Yeah, I'm called. Yeah, sorry. Pet peeve.
No, it's true. And sometimes they say, like, oh, we're making it useful, like directions to the post office or la biblioteca or whatever it is. But like when you actually first start having to talk a language in order to communicate something, you suddenly realize like your brain feels weird and you're like, wait, what? There's so many words I need to fill in this sentence that normally I can just throw out. Hang on a second, like I want to go to the, oh my God, there's so many words. And like, then you have people working in that language and I can barely ask like for that bread. Like,
Yeah,
man,
it's crazy. I think
it's amazing.
I hope that's a fairly widely felt sort of sentiment. But yeah, like I said, I'm not sure. But yeah, so in terms of using proper English and like I sometimes I guess I can sometimes extend that metaphor as well. Like when an English person's got bad English, it kind of bugs me a little bit. Because it's like if you do only speak one language, maybe just be able to speak that language.
Well.
is that too much to ask? I don't know. I appreciate that's quite a snobby thing to say, but I don't know. How do you guys feel that way about that at all, or is that kind of
that's such an important thing. Like, sorry, I've just got to jump in here. So both Alistair and I have been teachers of English abroad, right? And man, I've found that people whose native language is a language aren't the best teachers of it, right? I'm sure we've talked about this. Like, if you
especially on the finer points, it's grammar. Like a kid why is this sentence right? And you'd be like, no, it's not right. Why is it not right? It's just wrong. It just sounds wrong. You cannot tell you in a million years why it's wrong.
The people who have done, I don't know, people who have helped their dad since birth, like go and birdwatch, right, aren't necessarily the best birdwatch teachers because they're just like, well, it's just that because it is. Like I've always known that. It's the people who have to learn something are better at teaching it often because they remember.
And especially people who are bad at it as well at the beginning. I think that's
It's not natural, is it? How you learn.
The method to do it. So that's something that like a lot of people who think they want a native teacher. Yeah, you get native teachers who are very good, but I'm just saying that if someone's learned, there are a lot of people out there who've learned English as a second language who are miles ahead. I challenge any listener to just Google C2 English exam. And if English is your native language, you're going to find out pretty soon how hard these exams are.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember there was a kid at the school I was working at who was taking like some quite high level English exam, and he was going through the vocab. He was, oh, can you help me out with this? And like I thought, I was like, I think I was 18, 19 at the time. I was like, oh yeah, I went to a good school. I should be able to know. There's no problem at all. I knew like 30% of the words he was giving. He was just like batonage. I was like, no idea, mate. But what was even worse, he was obviously from the perspective of the kid as well. It's like he's learning words that sometimes had a double meaning. So I'd be like, oh, I do know that, and and tell him what it means. But he'd be like, oh no, that's not what it says in the book. So then he'd be learning these sort of very obscure sort of definitions for these words. That then I was like, this is not going to benefit you in the slightest if you're in the UK. But I mean, like I said, it's crazy. But I think that's similar to those citizenship exams as well, right? If you go to a country, then you've got to learn more about the history than the average.
More a
average,
patriot than a.
Exactly.
Have you seen the Peppa Pig episode where it's like they have a French exchange student, and it's like, oh, Daddy Pig, and he's like, oh, you could. It's this French exchange, so you could help. Could you help me with my English? It's like, oh, I think something along the lines, oh, you're a good teacher, and it's like, oh yes, I've learned, I known English all my whole life. It's like, oh, so for this, is this the suffix or the prefix? And he's like, and it's just the highlighting, like. No, just because you can speak it doesn't mean you're actually an expert in it. It just means.
Oh dear. So okay. Quick sort of tangent on this. What do you guys think of accents versus dialects, and sort of the evolution of that, and that in different countries that you've been to or experienced? So, obviously, I mean, just the three of us obviously have. I say Freddie and I probably have a fairly similar accent, and Johnny's. I know people who've listened to this in the past and asked me about it. They've gone, "Oh, where's Johnny from?" He sounds like a different person. Oh, they're like somewhere north of London, mate.
Yeah, it's a whole different world out there.
Different world, yeah.
Because I know, like, for different people, they've said I've got a relatively neutral accent, but I think if from near where I live, usually people think I sound a little bit posh, whereas if you're southern, you're like, no, you're dirty. So I feel relatively neutral. Not, Mum's from down south, so that's a little bit. I think is. Asking friends from Hungary of like, it's like, in England, if you travel 50 miles, you may have a different accent. What is it, that classic joke of being like, in America, you travel for 200 miles and it's the same time, you still got the same accent. In England, you travel 200 miles, the accent's changed 3 times and bread rolls are called something else.
Yeah.
And it's, so like, I asked in Hungary, I said like, well, there's kind of like maybe 2 accents that I maybe remembers incorrectly, but as I remember, it's kind of like 2 or 3 different accents for the country, and one's kind of a bit more basic, one's a bit more posh, and like but not nearly the amount of regionality. Same with like America. I'm sure you'll get different like regional accents, so like a regional Texas accent from north or south, but I'm assuming just because England's been here for so long, and pathways, say from in America, when they started building these big highways, you're able to travel the whole country. So, like, accents weren't necessarily going to change. Whereas England is going to take you, you've had a town there for hundreds of years, and they have.
Yeah, I think it's all about time, but oversized, right? Yeah. That makes sense in terms of the age of the countries being the significant factor. Yeah, for sure.
I think dogs have accents.
Oh no, okay. Quite cool. I will talk about dogs. Going back to animals, Johnny.
Freddie, put your bucket on your head, mate, if you want to talk about it.
Either you put the bucket on or you fill it with water when you talk. It's either or.
How bad is it now?
It's been absolutely fine since the last time. So
yeah, I don't believe you. You just laugh and
Whenever you
giggling
don't talk,
my
it's
bucket.
fine.
I was just going to say that accents are interesting because it's a form of social bonding. It makes an us and them. Like, we sound the same, but those guys sound different. And I think that's something that people like to hold on to. And it'll be interesting to see it, because people like to hold on to accents. Sometimes they put them on more. How it's going to happen in the future with internet and globalization. But a very interesting study, just because I do find linguistics fascinating. They I think it was in Australia. They had a study where they got a bunch of people, and they'd have someone with a very strong accent. Oh, that was it. It was Australians and New Zealanders, I believe. And they'd have someone with the same accent as them, as in from Australia, or different accent from them, as in from New Zealand. And they would have a conversation with the other person, the participant. Now, if the person talking, the paid for, the scientist, whoever, was saying views that the other person totally did not agree with, we're talking like, very sexist, racist views, the participant would start, like, their accent would shift away from the other person's. Like, they would try and sound as different as possible. but if they were saying something the person agreed with and they were happy having a good chat, their accents would come together and be more like that other person. I'm definitely like, obviously not giving this justice, but I
I'm with you.
I think what you call it, kind of like code switching, I guess, where you try and match accents with someone, maybe subconsciously, just as a sign of bonding.
That's Freddie, painfully so. My favourite story is we're in Tanzania.
No, we don't have to go there, you know.
I'm not going
I think we're going to now.
I'm not going to give an example of your accent that you try to do. But yeah, my mum does the same, and it's also embarrassing. She'll be on the phone, and like you'll hear that she hasn't talked in a while, and she's talking to somebody Scottish or something terrible, and like you'll eventually hear just
Something terrible at Scottish.
But do you like a noticeable accent which you can't, like if it's like a subtle, like maybe slightly going a bit more Scouse fare, but like Scottish is definitely a different accent from like Northern. And like you just see her voice slowly alter to being more Scottish, and it's like, what are you playing at? Stop it. She's relatively convincing. I'd say this is somebody, it doesn't sound too bad, but my favourite was Freddie. We're in Tanzania. I think maybe we were with a Polish teacher, a local lecturer, and no, he's Dutch. Netherlands? I can't remember. Netherlands.
Netherlands or Dutch or the same
Dutch.
thing.
Yeah, it's
He's
because in
Dutch
Germany,
because
Dutch is.
no, remember he was Dutch because
He's from
had
Holland, which is
fair
Dutch.
grasp on Afrikaans.
Yeah, but yeah. So either way, he's talking for way too long with a chat with me and Freddie, and the more he kept talking, and then obviously Freddie hadn't spoken anything in a while, and the next couple of sentences Freddie said were possibly the worst Dutch accent I've heard in my life, and it kind of kept up. He was mainly talking, the lecturer, so like we'd only like chip in little bits, and every time Freddie chimed in, it would be in this just terrible Dutch accent. And I feel like I'm sure he was appreciate maybe you just trying to do that emulating thing, but it just sounded like you were taking the mic. So funny. And after you knew what was going on, I feel, and you couldn't do anything about it because you just was that right or not? Did you know
I don't
or not?
Phase out, yeah.
I don't want to, like.
But it's because you're trying to be nice.
Trying to do anything.
You're just so filled with empathy, Fred, that you just.
You're sneezing a lot too. Just.
So one thing we briefly touched upon before, I don't think actually on the podcast, but we were talking about accents and babies, and being the owner of a small tiny human, Johnny.
Got it from the store and everything. Got that receipt.
What's your take on this? You were saying Ezra, your little boy, has started speaking now, and he's got a.
No,
he's just sort of saying nonsense.
Yeah, he's babbling, so he didn't really have an accent yet. But it's funny because it's a thing of so my sister-in-law, they live in Canada, and so obviously they're originally from the UK, and so their accents are Yorkshire siding towards, and then their kids though have got Canadian accents, and it's just because they moved over there when their kids were probably like 4 or something like that, and it's just the weirdest thing because it's like, oh, you're talking like normally, it's like, oh, it's just like a. You're not. It's like, oh, you're Canadian kids, and it's like that thought of like wherever you move, depending on the age of the kid, it's like you're gonna. For them, it's like you thought you're gonna be bringing up British kids because you're British, but no, you're bringing up Canadian kids, and it's funny that thought of the accent is so much of your personality. Like in high school, there was a girl who moved from Scotland when she was 6, but she still had a really thick Scottish accent, and it got thicker when she got into heated arguments as well, which everyone found a bit funny. But it's that thing of like, there's a certain age where obviously you lose or gain a new accent. Like Abby, she's born in Dubai and lived there off high school, and like they have a proper weird international accent. So like you'll be saying certain things, and some will be like a bit South African, some will be a bit American, some will be a bit British, and you'll hear like some like Dubai accents, and they're just all over the shop because it's super international, and it's this weird conglomerate accent, which is quite funny when you listen to it. It's not really it's a bit of everything. So you'll be like, oh yeah, try listening to like a Dubai accent if you can.
Isn't that fun? I mean, sorry to continually derail Alistair.
No, not
but
sorry.
I just wanted to chime in with my bucket head. Is that it's fun about accents, but it's fun to think about how none of them are like wrong. Does that make sense? If you're communicating, you're doing it right. That's about it, right? And so the fun thing about
if you've not got your bucket on your head or your put your face in underwater, then you're doing really well, I think, as a rule.
That's true. But English being super international now, people of such a large number of people speak English as their second language that their accent is more than just like it's more than valid. It's like a full on. It's their own thing.
About the right time now to wrap up the first half of this. So I'm going to pose some questions to you both. So to go right, I think basically what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to both find a story that to do with accents that you find that is kind of you capture. Like, have a look on Reddit, have a look wherever you want, really, but just a story that's relating to language or in some way, perhaps amusing. Amusing, maybe a bonus. And then we might dabble again a little bit more into the sort of the origins of sort of language and development of that, if that's something that where the conversation takes us. But pretty open ended the sort of question for this week. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening to that first half, and we will see you in what will be 10, 15 seconds, however long our new sponsor is going to be, which we're still waiting on, or a week for us. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. We will see you in a sec. Welcome back to No Idea Yet. It's been a week for us and a few seconds for you, and this week we're talking about languages. So let's get right into it. Let's go over to Freddie first for some insight and stuff on what you've researched this week.
Oh man!
So,
oh well, just.
So it was a nice and vague question. So, but we're just going. So I asked you to find a story or something. Basically, because I've sort of noticed quite a few of those in recent time, but obviously it was nice and vague so that you guys can run with it. So yeah.
Well, I kind of felt like, because language is massive, and we can talk about language from till the cows come home. Just chuck that in there, and what I felt like we focused a lot on was accents. So I researched more about accents.
Very nice.
Because I feel like maybe in the future we'll talk more about learning a language or like by ableism to talk about two languages. What the hell am I saying?
Bilingual.
Oh my god, bilingual. That's the word.
You actually are bilingual as well. That's the biggest joke.
Yeah. What I wanted to say was that as there's so much about language that I find interesting, especially being maybe bilingual or the effects of learning a language on you as a young kid or going to another country and blah blah blah. So I focused mainly on accents because I thought that's what we talked about. That was kind of the core. Now, there's actually so much about accents that every time you think that you've gone down a small rabbit hole, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'll talk more about the the varieties of how you can define an accent. I thought I'd first talk about the story because you mentioned story, right?
I did.
And I ended up reading a paper. I actually read the whole paper. Could you believe it? I was in the car for a while, but I read a whole paper by Kinsler et al. 2007, which is about how accents affect how you see people. And the whole point of the paper is that before you can even speak, you will judge people on their accents. Right? These are babies. Their experiment was like they had babies who couldn't even talk yet, but if you put a little video recording of a person speaking in an accent that's familiar or foreign or gobbledygook or whatever, like accent comes before, are you ready for this? Comes before race, age, gender, and other visible factors. You judge people on their accent. That's terrifying, isn't it?
No way.
And the paper, this is where the story comes in. The paper actually mentioned a story in it, and it mentioned the biblical story of Shibboleth. Johnny, as a more biblical man than I, do you know this story?
Oh, that name rings a bell, but unless you can talk about the Tower of Babel,
I'm not. Spoiler alert. So I'll just quickly read out a very short paragraph for the biblical story of Shibboleth, and the paper mentioned how basically America and the world as a whole has not changed from the kind of values that they talk about in this story. So, I'm sorry for my pronunciation of all these words. The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan, leading Ephraim, And whenever a survivor of a frame let me go over, the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he replied no, they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at this time.
Wow.
Oh. The point that it's getting to is that, well, actually, I'm going to basically the United States history alone abounds to the examples of linguistic discrimination, from the severing of tongues of slaves who spoke no English to the forbidding of the public to speak German during World War II, and the execution of Russian speakers after the Alaskan Purchase. Recent world history provides examples of linguicide paired with genocide in many places. And it's just like, wow, like accents have a huge effect on people. And like I said, I'll go into like kind of what an accent is and the different ways you can define an accent in a bit. But it like opened a whole door that I never really thought about with just accents. Not even the language you're speaking. You're speaking the same language potentially. You just have a funky accent. Oh man. Anyway, that was what I went down.
People will judge someone based on accent regardless of any actual facts about it, if you know what I mean. My thing about language story was this someone I work with who's from South Africa. It's also funny because obviously I live in a small town. Well, it's a pretty large town, which is rural, and it's just really funny that there's a random South African guy who just works at this hardware store, and it's like, how on earth did you get here? It's like I worked in Blackpool.
How did you swim? Did you go on a boat? How did you come from South Africa all the way to the God, the world we live in, mate. The world we live in.
And when I worked in Blackpool, there's somebody from Hungary who lived in Blackpool. And it's like, why on earth did you come all the way from Hungary to live in Blackpool? Do you know, like the answer is always love. To be honest, that I found. Mm-hmm. If someone's like in not necessarily for work reasons, that's it. But his story of just. In South Africa, usually you have one main language that you learn. So his was Afrikaans, and then what his subject he had was English, which they taught him obviously a lot better than we do. And saying about like the biggest difference for like language stories of South Africa is like a touristy place because you have safaris and things like that. And said like when you go on safari, it's if you go as somebody who's South African, it's loads cheaper. Like people who live in Florida, it's loads cheaper to go to Disney World than somebody who isn't from Florida. And so like. Sometimes in restaurants, I get it where people like they'll be chatting behind your back in Afrikaans, and then like I can hear you, mate. By the way, like stop being it. But yeah, so I think that's always a funny thing of obviously, especially when you're saying about like you may look the same. So say South Africa is a large white population, so you wouldn't necessarily know if someone speaks English, Afrikaans, where they're from, the American English. So before they speak, you don't know how to effectively judge them. Are you one of us? Are you one of them? Kind of thing. Yeah.
A lot of prejudice as soon as someone here. But,
always.
Yeah. You did confuse me for earlier when you said about you're like, before people even speak, they can judge their accents, and I was like, well, what? As in, obviously you meant babies, but I was like, how are you going to judge someone their accent before they speak?
Excuse my kind.
Yeah, no, it's about the tone and different things, but it's really weird. Like
this springs to mind is the thing from Inglourious Basterds where they have the German 3 with your index finger, middle finger, and thumb, right, and then the English one with your 3 middle fingers.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think that's not quite the same, is it?
But I saw that yesterday.
Isn't it?
Really?
Yeah, I saw it yesterday. My co-worker Simon was like, "Oh, we need 2 of them," and I was like, I looked. Sorry, I was just.
Explain for the listeners what you just did with your hand, Fred. Okay.
He said, "Well, my German co-worker said we need 2 of them," and used his thumb and first finger, but obviously that makes it kind of to me a finger gun, or at least pointing somewhere. So I was looking at the thing he was pointing at, and he's like, "Freddie, what are you doing?" And I was like, "We need 2 of them, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've got them right here."
Well, he's pointing at something else.
Like the finger gun.
Yeah.
Freddie's there with his hands above his head, like, okay.
But that was the thing that came up, was the fact that these kids who didn't they would judge people on their accents, and they would seek out people on the way they sounded already. But then the paper mentions how like there are many things that we judge when we're young, like loud noises and stuff, as being scary or wrong. but we learn to get over it. Like we learn that, oh, right, maybe we like this thing because it's interesting and different. Maybe we look forward to different foods and exciting things. But accents is not something we're actually taught to like kind of get along with. And it says that above all these other things like economics, age, race, sex, educational background, that is kind of, we talk about a little bit more today, obviously still not enough to say these things are things that you shouldn't judge someone on. But accent is a gatekeeping, is a thing that you can totally gatekeep on. You can just breeze through life hating people for funny accents and actually talk about it out loud, and people aren't going to kind of judge you in the same way they would if you said, I hate like women, for example.
I know my someone I knew, they were born in Scotland, moved away when they were a kid, lived in England, moved back to effectively from where they were born, completely rejected because they didn't have a Scottish accent. And it's like, no, I am actually Scottish, and I have lived in Scotland for like a number of years. And she continued to live in Scotland for, I think, 5 years or something like that. So you were born there, you've lived there for over like maybe 20 years or something, yet because you don't have the accent, just completely rejected. I think there's obviously a smaller community, so like, you know, I'm not saying that's all Scotland, but it's definitely one easy divide is definitely Scotland to England. And usually it's English don't mind the Scottish, and the Scottish tend not to don't like this.
Yeah. I experienced that myself when I'm sure Freddie obviously knows. I don't know Johnny. Obviously, I grew up in Staines, so the London way. And I moved there when I moved to Salisbury down south when I was 14. So then when I went back to Staines for a sweet 16th birthday party, and I remember when I got there, I opened my mouth. Quick language warning. But yeah, I opened my mouth, and one of my old friends from, you know, when we were little kids, I said something, and he was like, "Fuck me, mate, you sound posh as fuck." So yeah, it's definitely a thing. It's definitely a thing. Also, but it's such a fast, like, you sort of respond to it straight away, don't you? So yeah. But there you go, rubs off you cool kids. Southernness.
They mentioned that like it definitely is person dependent, right? Like they said on average there's like a window when you're younger for picking up certain sounds, and about around 12 months your brain decides which ones you don't need, such as in German, for example, like the s and the z sound they don't have a s sound, so they would say zat or whatever it is, or the h sound. But there's a window, and you can pick it up around that time. But there are some people, the same as there's a study on it, as young as 6, who move to a country or move to an area, and they never pick up the accent. They still sound like they're not from there.
Wow.
Like imagine being since you were 6, you don't even remember not living there, but people are like, you sound different. Like I can't even imagine that. But some people obviously do have a different ear and pick up stuff, try and mimic. Some kids are very stuck. They get very stuck in their ways. You lose the ability to listen or hear certain sounds, and you can't reproduce them yourself. It's not necessarily a physical issue. It's just a mental thing. Some people just can't do it, and then when you get older, like you've lost that forever. And so people as young as 6 who have moved to a certain area aren't ever able to get the right accent. I mean, that just sounds crazy. No, but apparently, like they've done studies and they've found that it's totally possible, as well as obviously some people really cracking down on trying to get an accent, learning how to do it when they're older.
So I've got a few things to go in with that. The first thing is, I was watching a show on Netflix called Babies, and it was a thing about a differentiation between accents, and like, even babies are able to. Because one thing of in the fetus, when you're a fetus, you can actually pick up accents and different languages. Well, yeah, not accents; it was languages. And that was up to 4 days old. A baby was able to discriminate between a native language and a foreign language, which is just mad. So I think it's because they'd react differently to it. So really, before they've even heard anything properly outside the womb, they already know if something's their language or not, which is just crazy. And it was up to, I think I mentioned it before, but just to confirm it, it's like the prime age for learning languages is up to about the age of 12. Past that age, then it's difficult. You know, like your brain is obviously as a baby super absorbent for learning languages, and then up until about the age of 12, that's when your brain kind of solidifies, and it's kind of like, yeah, learning language is going to be hard now. And of course, most schools start learning language at 12. You know,
Most schools in the
just
UK. I think, we mentioned this last week,
yeah.
right? But yeah, definitely.
Of course, that's
So,
UK only. I like one thing I was looking up, and talking about babies learning languages and why can't we learn them like babies? And it's babies have sky high unemployment rates, and I thought that was quite good.
they do have a lot of free time, just
Yeah, and
dusting
then
around.
another thing
That
was
is
on the
hilarious.
baby's Netflix thing was about differentiating
cracked down on that.
languages and faces. So do you know, like, when you look a cliche thing of, like, like a white person says, "Oh, all Asian people look the same," or vice versa. And the reason why is because up to a certain age as a baby's development, like, they can do even with like little monkeys and stuff. Of if you look at a monkey, you'd think, "Oh, they all just look the same. How do you differentiate?" Whereas a baby, if you show them a big group of monkeys, they'll have a certain thing in your brain just clicks to be able to differentiate really well. So, like, whoever babies grow up with, that's where they're able to tell these really slight, subtle differences in faces and recognizing.
Yeah, there's actually something really interesting that which I sort of I can't remember where I heard this, but it was a friend of mine pointing out that the thing with, like, the difference with Asian and white people saying, oh, or foreigners, because if you were to describe one of us, right? So you said, oh, Freddie, the first two things you probably describe was hair color and eye color, right? This is the go-to, and that's pretty standard, I think, for anyone in the UK. But obviously in China, if you're going to describe someone, you're definitely not going to describe their hair color and eye color, because the entire country has the same, right? So they describe things like their sort of like nose shape or their face shape. And I think if you look at Westerners, then invariably we're quite similar, sort of like jawlines and nose shape. So that's why I think that's that sort of where that stereotype comes from. Of like,
So
obviously,
it's just a case of
So the
Caucasian
points
kind
that we look at,
the
things that we focus on.
things that we focus on are different. So therefore,
we can relearn it, but it's a case of, we learn, just like with the language thing. There's a part of a brain which is really good at recognizing, and then it kind of sets a bit. So that's why sometimes somebody like, oh well, they all look the same, and like you could say you're being a little bit racist, but also it's actually it takes you time to learn the differences, as you're saying, to what to focus on to differentiate.
I'm sure everyone's got friends. We all had friends in school who were twins, right? And it's like when you first meet them, you're like, oh god, they look exactly the same. And then the longer you know them for, then you sort of you get the hang of it, telling them apart. So yeah, it's definitely a thing for sure. Like familiarity breeds,
Yeah.
I was going to say that's not the expression we're going for there
No,
at all. But familiarity doesn't breed, or if it does, that's not what we're going for.
If you knew that was something that you did, then you can recognise it and have a think before you kind of like, oh right, yeah, that's the way that they see the world, or that's the way I see the world. I need to take a moment. But I mean, you was just saying that then. I didn't even know that, really, but it makes sense. Think everyone thinks the same, right? Like, well, that's the way I think. Like, I identify people by their hair. Why wouldn't a person from Asia? But actually, yeah, like recognising groups have
for sure, all
ways
of that's
of doing things.
made worse. Yeah, all that's made worse by sort of being in a very much like a bubble, right? If you if you don't sort of get out there and experience more things and meet more people, basically, it's simple as that, and it really broaden your horizons and all that good stuff. But yeah, no.
So a big thing for language is, if no one has watched it, I just coincidentally I just realised today, it's just like, oh wait, I just watched a film which is so perfect for this podcast. It's insane. Arrival, if you've watched it, which is a film about aliens coming to Earth. Amy Adams is in it. It won loads of awards.
Super famous in the linguistic circles.
I can bet, because it's just all about how on Earth, when an alien species comes to Earth, how do you even understand them? Like, this is always the thing with, like, in biology we learn of, like, intelligence. We assume animals aren't intelligent as us because we're only using human tests. So like, yeah, they're not going to be as smart as us because we're only testing them as a human. And it's like,
if you judge a fish by its ability to just climb a tree, right, it will live its whole life being stupid. Kind of thing. Yeah.
And like the same with language, like, oh, say you could make a wish, and suddenly like, I wish I could understand a lion, and they could understand me, or they speak English, and it'd be like, you'd be talking about different things. You'd be like, oh, so what do you think of the weather today? And lion's like, what on earth are you talking about? They have no even relation to it. So you'd be like, it's not even, you could speak the same language, you'd be completely
That's actually,
different angles.
yeah.
I mean, there's actually a documentary on this. It was called The Wild Thornberrys, I think it was called. It was like a blast in the past. Any 90s kids listen to this, but yeah, no.
When I was looking it up, and I remembered, they actually said it in the film, is linguistic relativity, or the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, if I've butchered that, I'm sorry. And the idea is that the principle suggests that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview or cognition, and people's perceptions are relative to their spoken language. And there's two versions, a strong and a weak version. The strong one is effectively saying like you don't have as much free will comparative to what language you speak, and the weaker one is more about the language you speak does affect some of your choices and stuff, or like how you perceive things. And an
I
argument
found this
against it.
super interesting, and I've heard people on both sides, like as in some people fiercely saying, yes, your language affects how you think, and others
100%,
being
it
like,
definitely
no,
is.
how you think is affected, like, affects the way you
Yeah.
speak, and then people being like, it's all trash, but like actually very intelligent people on all sides, so you're like, I don't know who to side with here.
And one thing I heard is the case of like this has been going on for decades, so it's still a very valid theory because it's still a topic that's undecided on. Argument against is how can you even have translation if you've got different worldviews effectively? So it's like you couldn't. The argument against strong, the linguistic relativity would be that like just translation between two people just wouldn't work properly.
But that's
But,
like, but that's like direct translation, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, I've got to use Spanish here because I don't know any other real languages. But if you directly translated "lo siento," which means I'm sorry, but it doesn't. It means I feel it. Like if I just said to you, I feel it, that doesn't necessarily mean to you, I'm sorry, but that's what they're saying for I'm sorry. That's generally how they use it. And that's like Spanish and English are super close linguistically in the tree. Like if you went all the way to, I don't know, Micronesia or somewhere, their way of saying sorry might be generally how they use it in the same way, like if you make a mistake, but the way, if you try to translate it, it's not going to be perfect or slotting in.
There's
I'm
a really
sure
good,
that you
a really
guys-
good little story that I came across actually for this one. It was I think this is a lot about culture as well. So it's just quite amusing. So it basically said U.S. President Jimmy Carter once gave a speech at a college in Japan and was surprised to hear an eruption of laughter after his opening joke was translated for the audience. Right, and so he asked how the interpreter had managed to word it so well. The interpreter ducked his head and looked away before finally replying, I told the audience, President Carter has told a funny joke. Everyone must laugh.
That's really
best way to do it.
Excellent. The point that actually when you're learning a new language, you're learning a culture in and of itself. So
Yeah, but when they did a study, and it was based more on numeracy rather than actual language, but the two intertwined. As a study on kids, one set was from Austria, one Italy, and one the Czech Republic. And the way that they tried to do it is a test of speed and kind of like how quick they were to do it. So you had two numbers, one would be like 37 and one 78, and then you'd have to see which is the higher value, and they have to click on it. And the Austrians who speak German, they were the worst at it, and the reason why is apparently, I mean, you could say if I'm wrong, there's an extra step to it because as we'd say 37, they would say 730. So that's slightly, in your head. So that slight thing will be a slight disruption for the speed because it's 30. And so, like, say if you had like 37 and 72, the way you say it, the smaller number comes first.
Think of the poor French.
That's literally what I was about to say. That with their 80 is 420, right? You carry on all the way.
420. Yeah. They go 78. They go 70, 70, 20, 70, 30 or something. I can't remember how.
Oh man.
It's just
So Italians had no issues, and the Czech apparently they weren't affected, but in Czech they have numbers go both ways. So some would be like 27, others would be like 270. I don't know, but apparently they weren't affected. But I thought it was quite cool that whole thing of like the idea that your whole perception changes based on the language you learn. And always the Spanish word for the piece of shame.
Oh yeah, for what's the last piece?
Come on.
Oh right, vergüenza, like pedazo de la vergüenza.
Yes, which I always loved, the piece of shame.
Oh.
Yeah, no point in that at all. We're not going to explain what it is. We're just going to say it and then move on.
Just
Fred, do you want to explain what that is?
Left.
Yeah, basically, the last piece of food in Spanish is the piece of shame.
Like I really like this, and then I'm not even sure if it was just a thing that some people I was around like doing. Like again, have you ever? I don't know if you've come across that. Like if you, let's say you meet a Romanian, and of the Romanian guy or a couple or the group that you're with, they really think that, I don't know, trees are funny, right? And then because you've got a brain that likes patterns, you're like, right, all Romanians think trees are funny. it turns out that it's not true. It's
They
just
were
them.
high.
So
Yeah.
or they were high. So I'm not sure if it maybe it was just the people I was around, but they always commented on the pedazo de la vergüenza, which is the last piece. Maybe if you've got like some food, like a cake or like a bit of bacon, like you've all been eating and there's a little bit left, and it's the last piece is the piece of shame. Like if you take it, it's kind of like shameful.
'Cause everyone wants a bit.
But I just really like that.
Yeah, well, I do enjoy that. Yeah. Well, so I find it quite funny, like, talking about sort of words that some languages do and don't have, right? Like, that's this kind of, there's this thing like English having a word for, like, defenestration or something, which means, like, the act of throwing someone out of a window. There's an actual word for that. But we don't have a word for the day after tomorrow. Or the day Wednesday. Yeah, obviously, I think we're talking about some that sort of
That's
does,
the day after tomorrow is such a sentence. That's so
yeah.
true.
Why don't we like Chinese have a word for that? They have a word for the day after tomorrow. That will hold the entry.
Or
That is
bi-weekly or bi-monthly.
Yeah, again,
or
really
bi-yearly.
Yeah.
It's either twice a year or once every 2 years. There's no
Yeah.
It's just when someone says it, you just assume you know what they mean, and it's like you need to, because I learned it in horticulture, and it was like so this used to be done
Bianum,
like
innit?
bianum. It's like, well, does that mean it's every 2 years or twice a year? It just depends. You just some things, like, when do I have to plant this? Well, bi-yearly or bianum,
That's
biannually.
speaking of that. I was like, I'm around people right now who some of them are fluent. They're totally fluent in English. They maybe have an accent in a way that you'd like. Oh, I think you were raised somewhere else. But the other day, I've been hanging around them for like nearly a year now. Like the other day, I said, "Oh, it's about 7:30," and they're like, "It's what?" They asked me what time it was.
2:30 next hour, right?
And I said,
so,
7:30. And they're like, 7:30? What? It's 3.5 o'clock. I was like, no, you idiot. It's 7:30.
It's 3:30. No, but Germany has that, right? They have 2:30, so 7:30 would be 6:30 for us, because 2:30 the next hour.
Which makes sense because if you think you're on the 30 mark,
the clock is going that direction.
2:30. Yeah, it's Oh, one thing I looked up, because the thing of like what's the most spoken language in the world? Do you guys know it? Most spoken language.
Do you mean first? Do you mean first language, or do you mean?
This is it. Which I never thought of. I was like, Mandarin's first, then it's Spanish, then it's English, and that's native speakers, not by actual populations, the total mass. So, in native speakers, Mandarin, Spanish, English, Hindu, Bengali, Portuguese, Russian, Japanese, Western Punjabi, and Marath? I don't think I've written that right. Either way. And then population speakers is number 1 is English. So you've got 369 million native speakers, but then a whopping 978 million. So 1.3 billion in total, and the majority of that is non-native speakers. Mandarin second, and that's 921 million native and 198 million non-native. So it's 1.1 billion, and then it's Hindi, Spanish, Arabic, Bengali, French, Russian, Portuguese, Urdu. But I just mad that of like, it's...
Yeah, I feel like French, they always have a bee in their bonnet that French could have been the lingua franca, right? Which English is.
What, because we ruined more countries?
Yep, exactly.
Oh, question, Alistair, because Chinese, you have tones, don't you, of how you say things?
Do, yeah.
So are there accents in the same way? Because I feel that may affect it, or is it just more you get different dialects?
So the tones, you kind of get used. It's more like it's sort of sing-songy a bit, and it does make a difference when you speak it. But the most noticeable one I came across was that Beijing, they kind of have like an R, so it's like they kind of put R at the end of words and at the end of sentences and things, and that's more like the accent, I think. But because it's not dialects again, you have a whole like almost pretty much every different city you go to, there's like Shanghai Hua, like Shanghai language, and it's completely different to Mandarin.
Yeah.
And I know I suppose loads of words, and I was like, how did you learn it? Like, where did you formally learn this language? I don't know, just sort of pick it up. I was like, it's just mental to me. But yeah, no. But yeah, sorry, it was really fun. But Freddie, I think you maybe have something to add to this. I think he's hopping around in your seat there.
My God, like you've scarily tied in perfectly with one of the first things I wrote down when I was looking up accents, because like it's generally inverted commas agreed that dialect is like the umbrella under accents that includes dialect is the umbrella under language that includes accents. I could have definitely explained that better. But you see, accent is just a hugely diverse thing to do with like the lexicon, like the words you use, your grammar, like the way you say the sentence, like what do you say, and something called prosody. Now, prosody. Sorry, linguists out there. I didn't know this was a word, but this includes, right. So imagine you got someone who has a very similar accent to you. It could be your brother or your sister or someone that you're very close with. You've got a very similar accent, but on top of this, you can also, the way you speak, include irony, sarcasm, emphasis, contrast, and focus, and yet have the same accent. And that's just like what you're thinking about now. Think of in Icelandic. I could say to you in a way that you're like, yep, he's still a southern person from England. I can put emphasis on something, or I can be sarcastic about it, or I can somehow indicate irony in all of this. Like, it blew me away.
It's like one thing of it was so I wanted to look a bit into it about symbols of the fact of like all languages. So I looked up the exact definition of language. It's principal method of human communication consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way and conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. And it's that thing of like all symbols. Like if it's writing stuff down, or do you like you're saying about early man of like how you'd use tools, but then again you'd need to have a symbol for a tool, be that a hand gesture or maybe a certain type of grunt, or maybe like a picture you draw down to be like you're trying to say like, oh, we need this thing, and it's all symbols. And you're like, it's easy to when you think of, you see letters written down, oh, that's a symbol which means A. But when you think of like A or like a word, it's just a noise you randomly, not randomly, but it's for an alien, it's a random noise that somebody made, and for some reason it means something. It's a symbol. So if you think of
not even noise, like vibrating some air around you.
Yeah, like District 9, and you have like prawn aliens, and like how they talk is like, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how on earth would you discern anything on that? But that's symbols that are being made like instantaneously, which is just mad. And a thing of saying of I tried looking into like a universal language, and it mainly came up with programming and computers. But one thing of saying it was saying one thing for like the whole 100 words for snow. But the thing of like you'll never be able to truly have one language, because language evolves too quickly to just have one, which is so true of like everyone speaks the same language, and it's not going to take long until suddenly it starts like accents first, then slang, and then whole words are different. Then then you got like Scots is a similar one, isn't it? So it's like you can half understand it. I think Freddie, you read Train Spotting, which is in Scots, so it's kind of like you can and you can't understand it. All right.
Well, it's so good.
Yeah.
Even
there was actually
conference, right?
Oh, just that there's a big problem in the lingual universe recently, because did I talk to you about this? A guy who edited the entire Scots Wikipedia, pretty much. Like he wrote something like 9 articles a day for like 10 years in Scots, but he didn't write it in Scots. He wrote it in what he thought Scots was, which is basically typing in a Scottish phonetic accent.
Oh wow!
Like, it's basically kind of like, it's really cool that you tried, but you've kind of demolished like a huge amount of information on the internet where you have genuine Scots, which it's actually its own language. Like, it's not a dialect. It's just that there's certain like crossovers. But yeah, like, it's very interesting. I mean, people thought, just back on your point, that people thought, oh, well, on the internet, people talk to each other all the time. The languages are going to mesh over and kind of like all become like a conglomerate glob.
Conglomerate.
Does that make sense? Conglomerate. That's it. But like, it doesn't happen. People still find their own niches and groups on like forums and stuff, and they come up with their own languages and slangs, and that show that they're separate from other people. That's always happened, and apparently even the internet doesn't make a difference. It will still continue to happen.
Absolutely. Oh, again, it is going to come back to that kind of, just to bring it back full circle. It's kind of that whole us and them thing. It is, it's so much a part of our identity, right? Which is just meant.
Last thing, which I think is a great thing about language, of like you can go into politeness as well. Of like, for some reason you make a noise and somebody's suddenly hurt, or somebody's very happy, and like Doctor Who, there's an alien on it, and she starts every sentence with Chan and finishes it with Do. So it'd be like, Chan, oh, how you doing, Do? And just like that. And then it's funny because like one of the Doctor's companions is like, why do you say Chan and Do at the end of every start and end of every sentence? It's really weird. She's like, oh, because it's just polite. Well, what happens if you don't say it? Well, it's really rude. It's like swearing. And that thing of, like, someone can get offended you didn't say please, or you swear and someone gets offended, and it's like, it's funny because it's symbolism where it doesn't actually mean anything. It's just you've said a word, especially with swearing now, of like some words like crap is not really considered a swear word, whereas it used to be a big one, of how just some words will react, and there's another thing about music my brother told me about, of like, you get scary music. I think it's possibly a learned thing. I can't remember. I need to look that up. But yeah, just that thing of how do you associate things with certain feelings, or like someone puts a middle finger up at you, suddenly you flailed a bit of your body and someone's very offended. I think that's just really funny, that kind of when you just take a step back. You saw two aliens and one just like moves a bit of a tentacle in a certain way, and the other one gets in a fight and be like, why did you do that? Well, he just moved his tentacle that way.
That's your first thought. If you saw two aliens, mate, with some tentacles, and one of them did that, and you're like, oh, but that was it's just flipped into the bird.
A linguistic podcast called Talk the Talk, or actually no, now renamed to Because Language, that I hugely recommend. I think they like to reference that language, if you understand each other, is non-consensual telecommunication. Like, I could just yell something at Alistair and it's immediately in his head, and he's like, "God damn it!" Like, you can't stop it, right? Like, that's the weird thing when you start talking to people, or you're around people who speak a language you don't know. You suddenly realise how like serene it is. You're totally out of this bubble. Like, I'm hearing people yelling at Russian at each other today, and I'm just like giggling because I realise it's just gibberish to me. I'm really upset.
The first time I came back to the UK after having been in China for like the first time I was there, it was like about a year and just over a year. Like, I was in Heathrow Airport and it was just like language all around me that I understood. So it was like I felt like all like quite like cramped, like oh my god, this is really bizarre, and I felt invisible as well because no one was looking at me. It was very, very bizarre feeling. But yeah, no, it's very powerful stuff. So, I will call it there, I think, because this has been a nice little episode. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. This has been No Idea Yet. Signing off from Alistair, Johnny, and Freddie. See you next time.
Thank you very much for listening. If you've made it to the end, a huge well done to you. If you'd like to follow us on Instagram, we are at No Idea Yet Podcast, or send us an email if you've got any ideas for us. That is at noideayetpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.